Sign it, or I'll make sure you end up on the streets before midnight." Isabella Montgomery stared at the marriage contract sprawled across the mahogany desk, her stepfather's meaty fingers drumming impatiently beside it. The ornate dining room of their Connecticut estate felt smaller with each passing second, the walls closing in as Nathaniel Harding's threat hung in the air like smoke. "This is insane, Nathaniel. You can't just sell me off like property." Isabella's voice carried more confidence than she felt. At 22, she had learned to mask her fear around the man who had married her mother 6 years ago, only to gamble away their family fortune within 2. Nathaniel's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Sell you? I'm arranging a marriage that will secure both our futures. Darius Ashworth is one of the wealthiest men in New York. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" Isabella pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I've never even met the man. What kind of person agrees to marry a complete stranger? The kind who understands business." Nathaniel straightened his tie, a gesture Isabella had come to associate with his most dangerous moods. "Your mother left you in my care, and I've made a decision that benefits everyone involved." The mention of her mother sent a familiar ache through Isabella's chest. Margaret Montgomery had died 3 years ago, leaving her daughter at the mercy of a stepfather whose true nature emerged only after the funeral. The gambling debts, the failed investments, the slow dissolution of everything her mother had worked to build. "Darius Ashworth isn't known for his kindness," Isabella said, grasping for any argument that might penetrate Nathaniel's greed. "They call him the Beast of Wall Street. He destroys companies for sport. Exactly why he can afford to pay my debts." Nathaniel moved around the desk with predatory grace. $3 million, Isabella. That's what I owe to some very unforgiving people. People who don't accept excuses or payment plans. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. 3 million. The number was staggering, incomprehensible. How could you possibly owe that much money? Details don't matter. What matters is that Ashworth has agreed to clear the debt in exchange for a wife. A young, beautiful, untouched wife. His eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You fit the requirements perfectly." The word untouched made Isabella's stomach turn. She was 22 and had focused on her art and education rather than relationships. But the way Nathaniel spoke made her feel like livestock being appraised for market. "I won't do it." The words came out stronger than she felt. "Find another way to pay your debts." Nathaniel's expression darkened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, dropping it on the desk with a heavy thud. "Perhaps this will change your mind." Isabella's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Images of her mother with a man who wasn't Nathaniel, taken years before her marriage. Letters written in her mother's handwriting, intimate and passionate. Financial documents showing large cash transfers. "Your mother wasn't the saint you believed her to be," Nathaniel said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "She had an affair with Thomas Whitmore, the city prosecutor. These photos and letters would destroy his career and your mother's memory. The financial records show she accepted money from him during their relationship." Isabella's vision blurred as she stared at the evidence. Her mother, the woman she had idolized, caught in compromising situations with a married man. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. "Thomas Whitmore is now running for governor," Nathaniel continued. "Imagine what these would do to his campaign, to his family, to your mother's legacy." "You're blackmailing me with my own mother's secrets," Isabella whispered, the words tasting bitter. "I'm offering you a choice. Marry Darius Ashworth, and these photos disappear forever. Refuse, and I'll ensure they reach every major newspaper in the state. Your mother's affair will be front-page news, and Thomas Whitmore's political career will be over. Is that really what you want?" Isabella closed her eyes, trying to process the impossible situation. Her mother's reputation, a stranger's political future, and her own freedom all hanging in the balance. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like lead. "When?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The ceremony is scheduled for next Friday. Ashworth doesn't believe in long engagements." Nathaniel picked up the pen and held it out to her. "I need your signature now. He's expecting the signed contract by tomorrow morning." Isabella took the pen with numb fingers. The marriage contract felt heavier than it should, each clause binding her to a future she had never imagined. As she signed her name at the bottom, she wondered if she was saving her mother's memory or destroying her own life. Excellent. Nathaniel smiled as he collected the documents. Ashworth will send a car for you on Wednesday. You'll spend Thursday getting acquainted and Friday walking down the aisle. As her stepfather left the room, Isabella remained seated at the table, staring at her hands. In less than a week, she would become Mrs. Darius Ashworth, wife to a man known for his ruthlessness and cruelty. The girl who had dreamed of falling in love and choosing her own path had just signed away her future to protect the dead. The black Bentley that arrived for Isabella on Wednesday morning looked like a hearse. She clutched her single suitcase as the uniformed driver loaded it into the trunk without a word, his expression as cold as the October wind whipping through the Connecticut countryside. "Miss Montgomery?" The driver held the door open, his tone suggesting he had better places to be. Isabella slid into the leather interior, the door closing with a sound that felt disturbingly final. As they pulled away from the only home she had ever known, she didn't look back. There was nothing left for her there except memories and a stepfather counting his blood money. The drive to Manhattan took 2 hours, during which the driver maintained complete silence despite Isabella's attempts at conversation. She spent the time staring out the window, watching the landscape transform from rural estates to suburban sprawl to the towering steel and glass of New York City. The Ashworth mansion occupied an entire block on Fifth Avenue, its limestone facade rising 6 stories above the street like a monument to wealth and power. Wrought iron gates opened automatically as they approached, revealing a circular driveway bordered by perfectly manicured hedges. "Mr. Ashworth is waiting in his study," the driver said as he retrieved her suitcase. It was the first time he had spoken since Connecticut. A woman in her 50s wearing a crisp black uniform met them at the front door. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes assessed Isabella with the efficiency of an accountant reviewing ledgers. "I'm Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper," she said, taking Isabella's coat. "Mr. Ashworth has instructed me to show you to your room after your meeting." Isabella followed her through a marble foyer that could have housed a small aircraft. A double staircase curved upward on either side, meeting at a landing dominated by an oil painting of a stern-faced man in military dress. The walls were lined with portraits of previous Ashworth generations, their eyes seeming to track her movement across the polished floor. "The study is through here," Mrs. Pemberton said, leading her down a hallway lined with dark wood paneling. She knocked twice on a heavy oak door before pushing it open. "Miss Montgomery has arrived, sir." The study was a testament to masculine authority. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked both expensive and rarely touched. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single folder and a crystal paperweight. Behind the desk sat Darius Ashworth. Isabella had seen his photograph in business magazines, but the images hadn't captured the sheer presence of the man. He was larger than she had expected, his broad shoulders filling out a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Dark hair was combed back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. When he looked up from the documents he was reading, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "Sit down," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Isabella took the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. Up close, she could see the signs of exhaustion around his eyes, subtle lines that spoke of too many late nights and too much stress. There was something else there too, something that flickered and vanished before she could identify it. "I trust the journey was acceptable," Darius said, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care about her comfort. "Yes, thank you." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to her simple blue dress and back again. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Whatever game this was, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "Your stepfather has been quite thorough in his descriptions of your qualifications," Darius said, opening the folder on his desk. 22 years old, college-educated, no significant romantic attachments. Clean medical records. No criminal history or scandals. The clinical way he listed her attributes made Isabella's stomach turn. "You make it sound like you're purchasing livestock." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "In a sense, I am." Marriage is a business transaction, Miss Montgomery. I require a wife who can fulfill certain social obligations without embarrassing me or my family name. You require financial security and protection from your stepfather's creditors. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. And if I don't agree to this arrangement? His smile was sharp as a blade. Then you're free to return to Connecticut and face whatever consequences await you there. Though I suspect your stepfather's creditors are far less patient than I am. Isabella felt the trap closing around her like a steel cage. Nathaniel had been right about one thing. She had no choice. The photographs of her mother guaranteed that, even if the debt hadn't been real. What exactly do you expect from me? She asked. Discretion, obedience, the ability to play the role of a devoted wife in public. His eyes never left her face as he spoke. In private, you'll have your own suite of rooms and considerable freedom, as long as you don't interfere with my business or personal affairs. Personal affairs? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Darius leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I'm a widower, Miss Montgomery. My first wife died 5 years ago, and I have no intention of pretending this arrangement is anything more than practical necessity. You'll bear the Ashworth name and attend social functions when required. Beyond that, we'll maintain separate lives. The coldness in his voice was absolute, but Isabella caught something underneath it. A flash of pain so brief, she almost missed it. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw not the beast of Wall Street, but a man who had lost something precious. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? He stood and moved to the window overlooking the garden, his hands clasped behind his back. The ceremony is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The guest list is small, immediate family and business associates only. Mrs. Pemberton will ensure you have everything you need. Isabella rose from her chair, recognizing the dismissal. Mr. Ashworth, may I ask you something? He turned, one eyebrow raised in inquiry. Why me? Surely there are women who would marry you willingly, without coercion. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression faltered. Because those women would expect things I cannot give them. Hope, affection, the possibility of love. You, Miss Montgomery, harbor no such illusions. We understand each other perfectly. As Isabella left the study, she realized he was wrong about one thing. She did harbor illusions, not about love, but about the man behind the cold facade. In that brief moment when his guard had dropped, she had seen something that contradicted everything she had heard about Darius Ashworth. Tomorrow she would become his wife, but tonight she would try to understand the mystery of the man who seemed determined to prove he had no heart at all. The wedding ceremony lasted exactly 27 minutes. Isabella stood in the mansion's conservatory wearing a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Pemberton had somehow procured overnight, speaking vows that felt like reciting someone else's lines in a play she didn't understand. Darius answered the minister's questions with the same cold efficiency he probably used in board meetings. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Darius kissed her cheek with all the passion of a business handshake. The handful of guests, mostly older men in expensive suits and a striking woman with auburn hair who watched the proceedings with obvious displeasure, applauded politely before moving to the dining room for champagne and small talk about market fluctuations. Congratulations, the auburn-haired woman said, approaching Isabella near the French doors. I'm Cassandra Ashworth, Darius's sister. Isabella accepted the woman's offered hand, noting the firm grip and calculating eyes. Cassandra was perhaps 28, with the kind of beauty that required careful maintenance and substantial investment. Her smile never reached her eyes. It's nice to meet you, Isabella replied, though something about Cassandra's demeanor suggested the sentiment wasn't mutual. Darius certainly works fast when he sets his mind to something, Cassandra said, sipping her champagne. Though I suppose when you find exactly what you're looking for, why wait? There was something in her tone that made Isabella uneasy, but before she could respond, Darius appeared at her side. Cassandra, he said coolly, I trust you're making Isabella feel welcome. Of course, darling brother. We were just getting acquainted. Cassandra's smile sharpened. I was telling her how fortunate she is to have found you. Indeed. Darius placed his hand on the small of Isabella's back, a gesture that looked possessive to observers but felt protective to her. If you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Richardson about the Tokyo acquisition. As they moved away, Isabella felt Cassandra's gaze following them like a cold wind. The reception dragged on for another hour, during which Isabella smiled and nodded while various business associates offered their congratulations and assessed her like a new piece of office equipment. By the time the last guest departed, her cheeks ached from maintaining a pleasant expression. "You did well," Darius said as Mrs. Pemberton began directing the staff to clear away the champagne glasses. "Playing the role of a happy bride isn't as simple as it appears." "I wasn't playing a role," Isabella said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. Darius studied her for a moment, then glanced at his watch. "It's getting late. Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your rooms." "Your rooms, not our rooms." The distinction was clear, and Isabella felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been disappointment. The sweet Mrs. Pemberton led her to occupy the entire east wing of the third floor. A sitting room decorated in shades of cream and gold opened onto a bedroom that could have housed a small family. French doors led to a private balcony overlooking the garden, and an enormous bathroom featured a marble bathtub that looked more like a small swimming pool. "Mr. Ashworth's rooms are in the west wing," Mrs. Pemberton explained, setting Isabella's suitcase on the bed. "There's a connecting door through the shared study, but it's rarely used. Dinner is served at 7 when Mr. Ashworth is home, though he often works late. Ring for anything you need." After the housekeeper left, Isabella stood in the center of her new bedroom feeling lost. The luxury surrounding her was overwhelming, but it felt hollow, like a beautiful tomb. She unpacked her few belongings, which looked pathetic scattered across the enormous space, then wandered onto the balcony. The October evening was crisp, and the city lights twinkled beyond the garden walls. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the hum of traffic and the occasional horn, the sounds of a world that suddenly felt very far away. A soft knock at the connecting door made her jump. She opened it to find Darius standing in what appeared to be a study lined with maps and architectural drawings. "I wanted to ensure you had everything you needed," he said, though his eyes looked strained in the lamplight. "Yes, thank you. The rooms are beautiful." He nodded absently, one hand pressed against his temple as if fighting a headache. In the warm glow of the study lamps, Isabella noticed he looked pale, almost fragile compared to the commanding presence he had projected all day. "Are you all right?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Fine, just tired." But as he spoke, his eyes lost focus for a moment, and he reached out to steady himself against the doorframe. "Mr. Ashworth." Isabella stepped forward instinctively. "Darius." He blinked hard, his vision clearly struggling to clear. When he looked at her again, the carefully constructed mask had slipped completely, revealing something vulnerable and frightened underneath. "I need to sit down," he said quietly. Isabella guided him to one of the leather chairs by the fireplace, her mind racing. This wasn't exhaustion or stress. Something was seriously wrong. "Should I call a doctor?" she asked, kneeling beside his chair. "No." His voice was sharp, but his hand was trembling as he rubbed his eyes. "It will pass. It always passes. This has happened before." For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, as if making a decision that went against every instinct, he spoke. "I have a condition. Episodes where my vision becomes compromised. The doctors call it stress-induced, but their treatments are largely ineffective." His laugh was bitter. The great Darius Ashworth, brought low by his own nervous system. Isabella felt something shift inside her chest, not pity, but recognition. Here was the truth behind the cold facade. The reason a man who could have anyone had chosen a stranger who expected nothing. "How long have you dealt with this?" she asked gently. 5 years. Since Anastasia died." The name slipped out before he could stop it, and she saw him flinch at his own vulnerability. Isabella didn't push for more information, sensing that this moment of honesty was as fragile as spun glass. Instead, she reached for the crystal decanter on the side table and poured him a small measure of what looked like expensive scotch. "Here," she said, pressing the glass into his hands. "My mother used to say whiskey could cure everything except heartbreak." Darius looked at her with something approaching surprise. "And what did she say could cure heartbreak?" "Time and good company." Isabella settled into the chair across from him, though I'm not sure she was right about either. They sat in silence as his vision gradually cleared, the tension leaving his shoulders by degrees. When he finally looked at her again, his eyes held a clarity that had nothing to do with physical sight. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect? Someone who would run screaming from this room?" someone who would see weakness and exploit it. He set down the empty glass. Someone who wouldn't offer whiskey and folk wisdom to a man who just bought her like a prize mare. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. You didn't buy me. You rescued me, whether you meant to or not. Something passed between them in that moment. Not love, not yet, but the first tentative thread of understanding. Isabella realized that beneath his reputation as the Beast of Wall Street, Darius Ashworth was just a man carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. As he stood to leave, steady now but still cautious, he paused at the connecting door. Isabella, he said, using her first name for the first time. What happened here tonight? It doesn't leave this room. Of course not. He nodded once and disappeared through the doorway, leaving Isabella alone with the understanding that her marriage had just become far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. In showing her his weakness, Darius had inadvertently revealed something else, the possibility that the heart everyone claimed he didn't possess might still be beating after all. Isabella woke to the sound of raised voices coming from somewhere below her bedroom window. She wrapped a silk robe around herself and stepped onto the balcony, peering down at the garden where Darius and Cassandra stood facing each other near the fountain. This is madness, Darius, Cassandra was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. You barely know this girl. What happens when she realizes what she's gotten herself into? That's not your concern, Darius replied, his tone dangerously calm. The marriage is done. Isabella is part of this family now. Family? Cassandra laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. You think bringing home some desperate little nobody makes her family? She's a stranger who married you for money. Isabella pressed herself against the balcony wall, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. Part of her wanted to march downstairs and defend herself, but another part recognized the truth in Cassandra's words. She had married for money, or rather, to escape the consequences of refusing it. Enough, Darius said. I won't discuss this further. Won't you? Cassandra moved closer to her brother, her voice dropping to a level Isabella had to strain to hear. I wonder what your new wife would think if she knew about your little episodes. About how the great beast of Wall Street sometimes can't see his own hand in front of his face. Isabella's blood ran cold. How did Cassandra know about Darius's condition? Careful, sister, Darius said, and there was real menace in his voice now. You're walking on dangerous ground. Am I? Or am I simply pointing out that some secrets are harder to keep than others? Cassandra smiled, and even from 3 stories up, Isabella could see the malice in her expression, especially when there are new eyes in the house. Curious eyes that might notice things they shouldn't. After Cassandra left, Isabella retreated to her room, her mind spinning. The conversation felt less like a family disagreement and more like a carefully orchestrated threat. But why would Cassandra want to undermine her brother's marriage? An hour later, Mrs. Pemberton knocked on her door with a breakfast tray and an envelope bearing Isabella's name in unfamiliar handwriting. This arrived by messenger, the housekeeper said, her expression carefully neutral. Isabella waited until she was alone before opening the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, one of the images from Nathaniel's blackmail collection, showing her mother in an intimate embrace with Thomas Whitmore. On the back, someone had written a single line. Some secrets have a way of surfacing. Her hands shook as she turned the photo over again. The message was clear. Whoever had sent this knew about Nathaniel's leverage over her and was prepared to use it. But for what purpose? A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly slipped the photograph under her jewelry box as Darius entered. I wanted to apologize for my sister's behavior yesterday, he said without preamble. Cassandra can be difficult. She doesn't approve of our marriage, Isabella said, testing the waters. Cassandra doesn't approve of anything that doesn't directly benefit her. Darius moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. She's been the only woman in my life since Anastasia died. I suspect she enjoyed the influence that position afforded her. And now I'm here. Now you're here, he agreed, which changes the dynamic considerably. Isabella studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. What happened to your first wife? The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. Anastasia died in a car accident, he said finally. She was driving home from a charity event. The roads were icy, and her car went off a bridge into the river. His voice was carefully controlled. but Isabella heard the pain underneath. They said she died on impact. I'm sorry. It was 5 years ago. He turned from the window, his expression unreadable again. I have a business dinner tonight. Nothing formal, but you're expected to attend. After he left, Isabella sat on her bed holding the mysterious photograph. The timing felt too coincidental. Cassandra's threats, the photo's arrival, and now a business dinner where she would be on display as the new Mrs. Ashworth. Someone was orchestrating events, but she couldn't see the pattern yet. That evening, Isabella chose a simple black dress that struck what she hoped was the right balance between elegant and understated. The restaurant Darius had selected was the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, and the waiters knew which fork to serve first without being told. The dinner guests were a mixture of business associates and their wives, all of whom seemed to know exactly how to navigate conversations that touched on everything except the topics that really mattered. Isabella found herself seated between a steel magnate's wife who spoke exclusively about her horses and a technology entrepreneur who kept checking his phone between courses. Halfway through the meal, Isabella excused herself to find the ladies' room. She was walking down the corridor when she heard familiar voices coming from a private dining room with the door slightly ajar. The marriage changes nothing, a man was saying. Ashworth is still vulnerable. More vulnerable now, came the reply, and Isabella's blood chilled as she recognized Nathaniel's voice. The girl is our insurance policy. If he doesn't cooperate, she pays the price. Isabella pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Through the crack in the door, she could see Nathaniel sitting across from a woman whose back was turned to her. Your stepdaughter doesn't know about our arrangement, the woman asked. Isabella knows what she needs to know, that I have debts, and her marriage paid them. Nathaniel's laugh was ugly. She has no idea that the real game is just beginning. The woman leaned forward, and Isabella caught a glimpse of auburn hair. Cassandra, Darius has been getting sloppy, Cassandra was saying. His condition is worsening, and he's starting to trust people he shouldn't, like his new wife. Then we accelerate the timeline, Nathaniel said. How soon can you arrange another episode? Soon, but we need to be careful. If he starts connecting the dots. Isabella backed away from the door, her mind reeling. Cassandra and Nathaniel were working together, and somehow they were responsible for Darius's condition getting worse. But how? And what was their ultimate goal? She made it back to the dinner table just as dessert was being served, forcing herself to smile and make appropriate responses while her thoughts raced. Across the table, Darius was deep in conversation with a potential business partner, unaware that his own sister was plotting against him. When they returned home that night, Isabella followed Darius to his study under the pretense of saying goodnight. She needed to warn him, but she also needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. The dinner went well, she said, accepting the brandy he offered her. Richardson is interested in the Singapore project. That's worth celebrating. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To profitable partnerships. Isabella watched him sip his drink, her mind cataloging everything she had overheard. Cassandra had mentioned arranging another episode. Was she somehow drugging him? The brandy in his hand suddenly looked sinister. Darius, she said carefully, have you considered that your condition might not be entirely natural? He set down his glass and looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone was deliberately making it worse? For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by anger. That's a serious accusation, he said quietly. I know, but what if it's true? Before he could answer, his eyes lost focus again, and he gripped the arm of his chair. Another episode was starting, and Isabella realized with growing horror that she might have just watched him consume whatever was causing them. As Darius struggled with his failing vision, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She was no longer just a reluctant bride trying to survive a loveless marriage. She was a woman whose husband was being systematically poisoned by his own sister, and she was the only one who could save him. The question was whether she could figure out how before it was too late. Isabella spent the next 3 days watching and learning. She memorized the routines of the household staff, noted when Cassandra visited and what she touched, and most importantly, she began to understand the pattern of Darius's episodes. They always occurred within 2 hours of drinking his evening tea, a special blend that Cassandra had been preparing for him since childhood, according to Mrs. Pemberton. The housekeeper had mentioned it proudly, speaking of how devoted Cassandra was to maintain such a personal tradition. The devotion was real, Isabella realized, just not the kind anyone suspected. On Thursday morning, she found her opportunity when Cassandra arrived for her weekly visit. Isabella positioned herself in the morning room where she could observe the kitchen through the service corridor. She watched as Cassandra dismissed the kitchen staff and prepared Darius's tea herself, adding something from a small vial she kept in her purse. The evidence was clear, but Isabella needed more than her own word against a member of the Ashworth family. She needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny. That evening, when Mrs. Pemberton brought Darius his tea as usual, Isabella was ready. "Let me take it to him," she offered, smiling at the housekeeper. "I was just heading to his study anyway." Mrs. Pemberton handed over the tray without suspicion. Isabella carried it carefully to the study, where Darius was reviewing contracts by lamplight. "Your tea," she said, setting the tray on his desk. "Thank you." He reached for the cup automatically, but Isabella caught his wrist. "Don't drink it." Darius looked at her sharply. "Excuse me. The tea. Don't drink it. Please." Isabella's voice was urgent, her grip tightening on his arm. "I know this sounds insane, but I think someone is poisoning you." For a moment, Darius stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Then he set the cup down carefully. "Explain." Isabella told him everything. The conversation she had overheard between Cassandra and Nathaniel, her observations about the timing of his episodes, what she had witnessed in the kitchen that morning. With each revelation, Darius's expression grew darker. "You're telling me that my sister has been systematically poisoning me for years?" His voice was deadly calm. "I think so, yes. But I don't know why." Darius was quiet for a long moment, staring at the innocent-looking teacup. "I do," he said finally. "If something happens to me, if I'm declared incompetent or if I die, Cassandra inherits everything. The company, the estate, the family fortune. But surely you have safeguards." "I do now. But when the episodes first started, when I was grieving Anastasia and barely functional, I made Cassandra my medical proxy. If my condition deteriorates to the point where I can't make decisions." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Isabella felt sick. "She's been slowly destroying your vision to drive you to incompetence. Or to an early grave." Darius picked up the teacup and swirled the liquid gently. "The question is what to do about it. We could have the tea tested. If there's something in it, that would take days, and Cassandra would be warned the moment we involved outside authorities." Darius set the cup down with deliberate care. "No, we need to handle this differently." Over the next hour, they developed a plan. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was the only way to expose Cassandra without giving her a chance to destroy evidence or disappear. The following evening, Cassandra arrived for dinner as she did every Friday. Isabella had spent the day in nervous preparation, rehearsing her part until she could play it without thinking. "Isabella, darling," Cassandra said, air-kissing her cheek in the foyer. "You look lovely. Marriage agrees with you." "Thank you. Darius is finishing a call in his study. He should be down shortly." They settled in the drawing room with sherry while they waited. Isabella forced herself to make small talk about the weather and her adjustment to married life, all while watching Cassandra for any sign of suspicion. "I hope my brother has been treating you well," Cassandra said, her tone suggesting concern that didn't reach her eyes. "He can be difficult when he's not feeling himself." "He mentioned having some health issues," Isabella replied carefully. "Nothing serious, I hope?" "Oh, just stress-related problems. He's been dealing with them since Anastasia died. Poor dear pushes himself too hard." Cassandra's expression was perfectly crafted sympathy, though I notice his episodes have been more frequent lately. Perhaps the excitement of a new marriage. The woman was fishing, Isabella realized, trying to determine how much Isabella knew about Darius's condition. "I haven't noticed anything unusual," Isabella lied smoothly. "He seems perfectly healthy to me." When Darius joined them, he appeared relaxed and normal, giving no sign that anything was amiss. The three of them proceeded to dinner, where conversation flowed easily over topics ranging from business to social events. After the meal, they retired to the study for coffee and brandy. Cassandra excused herself briefly, ostensibly to powder her nose, but Isabella knew she was actually preparing Darius's evening tea in the kitchen. "Here we are," Cassandra said when she returned, carrying a silver tray with the familiar teacup. "Your special blend, just the way you like it." Darius accepted the cup with a grateful smile. You spoil me, sister. I don't know what I'd do without you. I only want what's best for you, Cassandra replied, settling back into her chair to watch him drink. Isabella held her breath as Darius raised the cup to his lips. At the last second, he paused. This smells different tonight, he said, frowning slightly. Stronger somehow. Cassandra's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. I may have used a bit more of the special herbs. You've seemed so tired lately. Special herbs? Isabella asked innocently. What kind? Oh, just family recipes passed down through generations, Cassandra said, waving her hand dismissively. Nothing you'd find interesting. Darius took a sip, then another. Isabella watched Cassandra's face relax as she assumed her plan was proceeding normally. 20 minutes later, right on schedule, Darius's vision began to fail. Not again, he muttered, pressing his palms against his eyes. Isabella, could you help me to my room? Of course. Isabella moved to his side, supporting his arm as he stood unsteadily. Should I call Dr. Morrison? Cassandra asked, rising from her chair. Her concern sounded genuine, but Isabella caught the satisfied gleam in her eyes. No need, Darius said heavily. It will pass, as always. Isabella helped him from the room, leaving Cassandra alone with the evidence of her crime. As soon as they were out of sight, Darius straightened, his vision perfectly clear. Phase 1 complete, he whispered. Now we wait. They positioned themselves in the hallway where they could observe the study through the partially open door. Within minutes, Cassandra was moving with quick efficiency, collecting the teacup and tray. Instead of leaving them for the staff to clean, she took them toward the kitchen herself. She's destroying the evidence, Isabella whispered. Not quite yet, Darius replied grimly. They followed at a distance, watching as Cassandra entered the kitchen and moved to the sink. She was just raising the teacup when Darius stepped into the doorway. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet kitchen like a blade. Cassandra spun around, the teacup still in her hands, her face a mask of startled innocence that couldn't quite hide the guilt underneath. Darius, you startled me. I was just cleaning up. Were you? He stepped into the kitchen, and Isabella followed, closing the door behind them. Or were you destroying evidence? I don't know what you mean. But Cassandra's grip on the teacup had tightened, and her knuckles were white with tension. I think you do. Darius moved closer, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. I think you know exactly what I mean, sister dear. The question is whether you're going to make this easy or difficult. Isabella watched the confrontation unfold, her heart pounding. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Either they would finally expose Cassandra's crimes, or the woman would find a way to escape justice once again. The teacup trembled in Cassandra's hands, and Isabella realized that despite all her planning and manipulation, Darius's sister had never considered the possibility that her victims might fight back. The silence in the kitchen stretched taut as a wire before snapping. You're being paranoid, Darius, Cassandra said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle in the enclosed space. All this stress is making you imagine things. Am I imagining the small vial you keep in your purse? Darius asked, his voice dangerously soft. The one you used this morning when you thought no one was watching? Cassandra's face went pale, but she rallied quickly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Then you won't mind if we search your purse, Isabella said, stepping forward. Just to clear up any confusion. This is ridiculous. Cassandra set the teacup down with shaking hands. I've been taking care of you since we were children, Darius. How can you accuse me of trying to hurt you? Because you killed Anastasia. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the air. Isabella felt her breath catch, even though she had suspected this truth was coming. Cassandra's mask finally slipped completely. You don't know what you're saying, don't I? Darius moved closer, and Isabella could see the controlled fury in every line of his body. 5 years ago, my wife died in a car accident. Except it wasn't an accident, was it, Cassandra? You tampered with her brakes because you couldn't stand to see me happy. She was wrong for you. The words burst out of Cassandra like water from a broken dam. Anastasia was weak, clingy, always hanging on you like some pathetic decoration. She would have ruined everything we built together. Isabella felt sick. The casual way Cassandra spoke about murder, as if it were merely an inconvenient business decision, revealed the depth of her twisted reasoning. We never built anything together, Darius said coldly. You lived in my shadow and convinced yourself it was partnership. I was the one who supported you after father died. Cassandra's voice was rising, years of resentment pouring out. I was the one who helped you build the company, who stood by you through every crisis. And how did you repay me? By bringing home some simpering little girl who batted her eyelashes and made you forget everything that mattered. What mattered was that I loved her. Love. Cassandra spat the word like poison. Love is weakness, Darius. It makes people stupid and careless. Anastasia made you weak. Isabella understood now why Cassandra had been so threatened by her brother's happiness. In her twisted mind, she saw herself as his true partner, the only person worthy of his attention and trust. Anyone else was competition to be eliminated. So you killed her, Darius continued, his voice steady despite the pain Isabella could see in his eyes. And when that wasn't enough, when I didn't turn to you for comfort the way you expected, you started poisoning me. Slowly, carefully, making it look like grief-induced illness. You left me no choice. Cassandra's composure was completely gone now, her face twisted with fury and desperation. You shut me out, barely spoke to me for months. I tried everything to reach you, but you just kept withdrawing further and further. The only time you needed me was when you were having an episode. The sick logic was becoming clear to Isabella. Cassandra had been creating situations where she was indispensable, manufacturing crises that only she could solve. The caring sister bringing her brother tea, offering comfort during his mysterious illness, gradually positioning herself as his sole source of support. And then Isabella came along, Darius said quietly. Another threat to your plans. Another weakness to exploit, Cassandra corrected. I thought you'd learned your lesson about trusting outsiders, but apparently you're slower than I anticipated. Isabella stepped forward, anger overriding caution. That's why you've been working with Nathaniel. To control both of us. Cassandra's laugh was harsh and ugly. Your stepfather is a useful idiot, nothing more. He thinks this is about money, about getting rich off your marriage. He has no idea that the real goal is removing you from the equation entirely. Removing me how? Isabella asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Accidents happen so easily, Cassandra said with a shrug. Young wives sometimes meet tragic ends, especially when they start asking too many questions or sticking their noses where they don't belong. The casual way she discussed murder made Isabella's blood run cold. This wasn't just about jealousy or greed. Cassandra was genuinely unstable, capable of justifying any action in service of her obsession with controlling her brother's life. It ends now, Darius said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small recording device, its red light blinking steadily. Every word you've said has been captured, along with the security footage from this kitchen showing you tampering with my tea. Cassandra stared at the device, her face cycling through expressions of shock, rage, and finally, calculation. You think you're so clever, don't you? But who do you think they'll believe? The grieving brother driven to paranoia by his illness, or the devoted sister who's been caring for him all these years? They'll believe the evidence, Isabella said firmly. And they'll believe me. You? Cassandra turned to her with contempt. A gold-digging nobody who married my brother for money? Your credibility is hardly stellar. Maybe not, Isabella admitted. But I'm not the only witness. The kitchen door opened, and Mrs. Pemberton stepped inside, followed by Dr. Morrison and 2 police officers. Isabella felt relief flood through her as she realized their backup plan had worked perfectly. I've heard enough, Dr. Morrison said grimly. He was an elderly man who had been treating the Ashworth family for decades, and his face showed both sadness and anger. Cassandra, I need you to give me that vial from your purse. Now. For a moment, Isabella thought Cassandra might try to run or fight. Instead, she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her all at once. You don't understand, she said quietly, looking directly at Darius. Everything I did was for you. To protect you. To keep you safe from people who would use you and hurt you. Like Anastasia, like Isabella. Darius's voice was heavy with sorrow rather than anger now. They weren't threats, Cassandra. They were people I cared about. Caring about people is what makes you vulnerable, Cassandra replied, reaching into her purse with resigned movements. She handed the small vial to Dr. Morrison. I was trying to save you from yourself. One of the police officers stepped forward with handcuffs. Cassandra Ashworth, You're under arrest for the murder of Anastasia Ashworth and the attempted murder of Darius Ashworth." As they led Cassandra away, she looked back at her brother one last time. "This won't end with me, Darius. There are others involved, people you haven't even considered. Your precious little wife isn't as innocent as she pretends to be." The words sent a chill down Isabella's spine, but before she could ask what Cassandra meant, the woman was gone. Later that evening, after the police had finished their questions and Dr. Morrison had taken samples of the tea for analysis, Isabella and Darius sat in his study in exhausted silence. "I'm sorry," Darius said finally, "for all of it, for what she put you through, for the danger I brought into your life." "You didn't know," Isabella replied softly. "She was your sister. How could you have suspected? I should have seen the signs sooner." The way she reacted to Anastasia, her possessiveness, her need to control every aspect of my life. He rubbed his eyes wearily. 5 years of my life stolen, and Anastasia's life taken entirely, because I was blind to what was right in front of me. Isabella moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "You're not blind anymore, and you're going to recover from this. Dr. Morrison said the effects of whatever she was giving you should reverse once it's out of your system." Darius looked at her with something approaching wonder. "Why did you stay? Why didn't you run the moment you realized what kind of family you'd married into?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications Isabella wasn't sure she was ready to explore. But as she looked into his gray eyes, she realized the truth had been building slowly over the past weeks. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about obligation or fear, she said quietly. It became about caring what happened to you. For the first time since she had known him, Darius smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression he wore in public, but something genuine and warm that transformed his entire face. "I care what happens to you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible." As he leaned forward to kiss her, Isabella felt the last walls between them crumbling. But even as she lost herself in the moment, Cassandra's final words echoed in her mind. There were others involved, people they hadn't considered. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Isabella had the unsettling feeling that their troubles were far from over. The call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Isabella from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. She fumbled for the phone on her nightstand, noting that Darius's side of the bed was empty. They had been sharing the same room since Cassandra's arrest, neither wanting to be alone with their thoughts. "Mrs. Ashworth." The voice was unfamiliar, gravelly with the kind of roughness that spoke of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "Yes, who is this?" "Someone who has something that belongs to you. Or should I say, someone who belongs to you." Isabella's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband left early this morning for a business meeting. Except the meeting was with us, and he won't be coming home unless you do exactly what we say." The phone slipped from Isabella's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She scrambled to retrieve it, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Are you there, Mrs. Ashworth?" "I'm here," she managed. "What do you want?" "What we've always wanted. For you to disappear. Permanently." The voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "Cassandra may be in jail, but she has friends on the outside. Friends who understand the importance of completing unfinished business." Isabella's mind raced. Cassandra's final warning had been more than just spite. It had been a promise. Even behind bars, she was still pulling strings, still trying to eliminate anyone who threatened her hold over Darius. "Where is he?" "Pier 47, Warehouse District. Come alone, no police, no clever plans. You have 1 hour, or your husband joins his first wife." The line went dead, leaving Isabella staring at the phone in horror. She tried calling Darius's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. His office number rang endlessly without answer. 45 minutes later, Isabella was driving through the Warehouse District in Darius's spare car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She had left a note explaining everything, hidden where only Mrs. Pemberton would find it, along with instructions to call the police if she wasn't back by dawn. Pier 47 was a sprawling complex of abandoned warehouses that had once served the shipping industry. Now it was a maze of broken windows and rusted metal, the perfect place for things to disappear without a trace. Isabella parked near the main building and walked toward the entrance, every shadow seeming to hide potential threats. The heavy door was unlocked, opening with a screech that echoed through the empty space. Mrs. Ashworth. A voice called from somewhere in the darkness. Right on time. A single spotlight flickered on, illuminating a scene that made Isabella's heart stop. Darius was tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse floor, his head hanging forward as if he was unconscious. Blood stained his white shirt, and his face bore fresh bruises. Darius. Isabella started forward, but stopped when three men emerged from the shadows, their positions forming a triangle that effectively trapped her. "He's alive," said the man who seemed to be their leader, a thin figure with dead eyes and a voice like gravel. "For now, whether he stays that way depends entirely on your cooperation." "What do you want me to do?" "Die," the man said simply. Cassandra was very specific about that. She said to make it look like an accident, maybe a grieving wife who couldn't handle the stress of her husband's legal troubles. A tragic suicide that would leave Darius free to focus on the family business without distractions. Isabella felt sick. Even from prison, Cassandra was still trying to manipulate her brother's life, still convinced that she knew what was best for him. "And if I refuse? Then we kill you both and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Either way, the problem gets solved." Isabella's mind raced, searching for options. She was outnumbered and outgunned, with no backup coming and no way to overpower three grown men. But she had one advantage they didn't know about: the small recording device Darius had given her after Cassandra's arrest, which was still hidden in her coat pocket. "Before you kill me," she said, moving slowly toward Darius's chair, "I want to know something. How long has Cassandra been planning this?" The leader shrugged. "Years, probably. She's been setting up contingencies since before you even married her brother. The woman thinks of everything, including murder, especially murder. She planned Anastasia's death for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Car accidents are so convenient. Difficult to prove they weren't really accidents." Isabella reached Darius's side and knelt beside his chair, ostensibly to check if he was breathing. Under cover of the movement, she slipped the recording device into his jacket pocket, hoping the conversation was being captured clearly. "Is that what you're going to do to us? Make it look accidental?" "Nah, we're going with the murder-suicide angle. Much more dramatic, and it explains why there are two bodies instead of one." One of the other men laughed, a sound that made Isabella's skin crawl. "Boss, we should probably get this moving. Cops patrol this area pretty regular." The leader nodded and pulled out a gun, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. "You're right. Mrs. Ashworth, I need you to move away from your husband and stand over there." Isabella rose slowly, her mind still searching desperately for a way out. As she took a step back, Darius's hand moved slightly, his fingers curling in what might have been a deliberate signal. He was conscious, or at least partially so. "Any last words?" the leader asked, raising his weapon. "Just one," Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. Now, the warehouse exploded into chaos. Darius surged upward from the chair, the ropes that had seemed to secure him falling away like they had been cut from behind. At the same time, the main doors burst open and police officers flooded into the space, their flashlights and weapons creating a blinding array of light and movement. Isabella threw herself to the ground as gunfire erupted around her, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She could hear shouting, running footsteps, and the distinctive crack of weapons being discharged. When the noise finally stopped, Isabella cautiously raised her head. Two of the kidnappers were on the ground, surrounded by police officers. The third, the leader, was backing toward a side door, his gun trained on the nearest officer. "Let me walk out of here, or I start shooting civilians," he shouted. "That's not going to happen," came a familiar voice, and Isabella turned to see Darius moving through the crowd of officers. His shirt was still bloody and his face bore fresh bruises, but he was upright and alert. "You should be tied up," the gunman said, confusion evident in his voice. "I should be," Darius agreed. "But your knots weren't as tight as you thought, and I've been awake longer than you realized. Long enough to text my location to the police before you took my phone." The gunman's eyes darted around the warehouse, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Cassandra said you were weak. Said your condition made you helpless." "Cassandra said a lot of things," Darius replied. "Most of them were lies." The final standoff lasted less than a minute. When the gunman realized he was completely surrounded with no chance of escape, he dropped his weapon and surrendered. As the police led the three men away, Isabella found herself wrapped in Darius's arms, both of them shaking with relief and residual adrenaline. "How did you know to bring backup?" she asked. "I didn't trust that note about the early morning meeting," he replied. "It felt wrong, too convenient. So I went, but I brought security with me. When they grabbed me, my security team followed at a distance and called the police. And the ropes were cut before they even tied them. One of the officers got into position behind my chair while they were distracted with you." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "You were incredibly brave, Isabella, and incredibly foolish. I couldn't let them hurt you. And I couldn't let them hurt you." He cupped her face in his hands. "Which is why this ends now. I'm having Cassandra transferred to a maximum security facility, and I'm hiring the best security team money can buy. No one is ever going to threaten you again." As they walked out of the warehouse together, Isabella realized that the ordeal had changed something fundamental between them. They were no longer two strangers bound by circumstance, or even two people learning to care for each other. They were partners who had faced genuine danger together and emerged stronger for it. The girl who had signed a marriage contract to save her mother's reputation was gone, replaced by a woman who had risked everything to save the man she loved. And the beast of Wall Street had revealed himself to be simply a man who would move heaven and earth to protect the woman who had become his world. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward home, Isabella knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Cassandra's network might extend beyond prison walls, but it could never be stronger than the bond that had been forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual trust. The storm that had threatened to destroy them had passed, leaving them not broken but transformed, and ready to build something new from the wreckage of their separate past lives. 6 months later, Isabella stood on the terrace of their new home in Nantucket, watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of gold and rose. The house was smaller than the Manhattan mansion, built of weathered cedar and glass that seemed to embrace the sea rather than dominate it. It felt like sanctuary after the ornate prison of their previous life. "You're up early," Darius said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "So are you." Isabella leaned back against his chest, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "Couldn't sleep? Too much excitement about today." Today was their second wedding, a real one this time, with vows they meant and promises they chose to make. The guest list was small: Mrs. Pemberton, Dr. Morrison, a few close friends from Darius's business world, and Thomas Whitmore, who had become an unexpected ally after learning the truth about Nathaniel's blackmail scheme. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings and revelations. Cassandra had been sentenced to life in prison for Anastasia's murder and the attempted murder of Darius. Her network of accomplices had been systematically dismantled, including several business associates who had been helping her siphon money from Ashworth Industries for years. Nathaniel had received 15 years for conspiracy, extortion, and his role in Isabella's kidnapping. During his trial, he had tried to implicate Isabella in his schemes, claiming she had been a willing participant in his plans. But the evidence had been overwhelmingly against him, and his desperation had only served to highlight his guilt. "Dr. Morrison called yesterday," Darius said, his voice carefully neutral. The final test results came back. Isabella turned in his arms to face him, searching his expression. For the past 3 months, Darius had been undergoing extensive medical treatment to reverse the damage from years of poisoning. The process had been slow and sometimes painful, but gradually his vision had begun to stabilize. And complete recovery. No permanent damage, no residual effects. His smile was radiant. "I'm officially cured of everything except an addiction to my wife's company." Isabella laughed, feeling tears of relief prick her eyes. "I suppose I can live with that addiction." "Good, because Dr. Morrison also cleared us for other activities." His eyes held a heat that made her pulse quicken, like extending our family. The conversation they had been dancing around for weeks finally crystallized. Isabella had been afraid to hope, afraid to plan for a future that had seemed so uncertain when they were still dealing with the legal aftermath of Cassandra's crimes. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" she asked softly. "I'm saying that I love you, Isabella Ashworth. Not because circumstances forced us together, not because you saved my life, but because you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm saying that I want to build a real life with you, filled with all the messy, beautiful complications that real love brings." Children, if you want them. A dozen of them, if that would make you happy. Isabella thought of the scared young woman who had signed a marriage contract in a Connecticut dining room, trading her freedom for her mother's reputation. That woman had been desperate and alone, with no idea that salvation could come disguised as a business arrangement. I want them, she whispered. I want everything with you. When he kissed her, Isabella tasted salt spray and new beginnings. The terrace faced east, toward the sunrise and the endless possibilities of the ocean beyond. 2 hours later, they stood in the garden behind their Nantucket home, surrounded by friends who had become family. Isabella wore a simple white dress that moved like water in the ocean breeze, and Darius had abandoned his usual business attire for khakis and a white shirt that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. Do you, Darius Ashworth, take Isabella to be your wife, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Darius said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. I promise to love you, to protect you, to stand beside you through whatever challenges life brings us. I promise to trust you with my heart, my fears, and my dreams. Do you, Isabella Montgomery Ashworth, take Darius to be your husband, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. I promise to love you without conditions, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you based on honesty and trust. I promise to be your partner in everything, from the smallest daily joys to the greatest adventures. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife for the second time, their kiss felt like coming home. The small gathering erupted in applause, but Isabella barely heard it. Her world had narrowed to the man in her arms and the future spreading out before them like an uncharted ocean. Later that evening, after their guests had departed and the catering staff had cleared away the remnants of the celebration, Isabella and Darius walked along the beach behind their house. The moon was full, casting a silver path across the water that seemed to lead to infinity. Any regrets? Darius asked, his hand warm in hers. Isabella considered the question seriously. About marrying you? None. About the path that led us here? Some. Such as, I regret that Anastasia never got the chance to see you happy again. I regret that your sister's jealousy cost so many people so much pain. She squeezed his hand. But I don't regret that we found each other, even under such difficult circumstances. I used to think that happiness was something that happened to other people, Darius said quietly. After Anastasia died, I convinced myself that I was broken, that I didn't deserve a second chance at love. And now I think that sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. We were both trapped by other people's choices, both forced into an arrangement neither of us wanted. But we chose to make it real. A year later, Isabella stood in the same spot on the beach, watching Darius build an elaborate sandcastle with their 6-month-old daughter. Elena had inherited her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, along with an impressive pair of lungs that she used to great effect when she wanted attention. I think she's destined to be an architect, Darius said, holding Elena up so she could pat the top of his sand creation. She has very definite opinions about structural integrity. Isabella laughed, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly where their second child was growing. The baby wasn't due for another 4 months, but she was already showing enough that Darius had become absurdly protective, insisting on carrying everything heavier than a teacup. Speaking of architecture, Isabella said, the contractor called. The foundation for the new wing is ready for inspection. They were expanding the Nantucket house to accommodate their growing family and Darius's decision to run Ashworth Industries primarily from the East Coast. Manhattan would always be part of their lives, but this was home now. This place where they could watch their children grow up with sand between their toes and salt air in their lungs.